Welcome, everybody, to another edition of All In with Art Stapleton, a New York Giants podcast brought to you by NorthJersey.com and The Record. I'm your host, Art Stapleton, and it is one day left in May. It's almost June, folks, and you know what that means. The season is suddenly creeping up on us. We've still got more than 2 months away before training camp shows up, but the New York Giants and the 2024 season, third year for Brian Daboll and Joe Schoen, is coming fast. And what have we seen this spring? Well, I figure I'll use today's show as a good opportunity to kind of bounce around, give you some hot topics that we've discussed on social media, we've had in stories on NorthJersey.com, but also save some exclusive stuff for the podcast. And, you know, this is the time of year where we take some time in between shows. And thanks to my producer, Paul Wood, we are back. We will do a show. We were at the, I guess it's fifth OTA practice, which was on Thursday in East Rutherford. That was the second of the spring that was open to the media. We have one more OTA practice open to the media. That's next Thursday, June 6th. And then we have 2 days of the mandatory minicamp, which essentially is just an extension of the voluntary OTAs. Giants have had very good participation. Welcome back Darius Slayton, who missed the first 3 OTAs, showed up this week. He has incentives added to his contract. Not much. I think it totals, if he hits all the incentives, which are not easily attained, we'll just say that, it'll be about another $600,000 or so for his contract going into this season. So not necessarily a huge contract play for Slayton going into the final year of a 2-year deal. But other than that, the Giants have had everyone here. This isn't the situation where the Giants have looked for, you know, veterans that have been holding out or seeking new contracts. That hasn't really happened. So it's really just an extension. And then just to kind of set the calendar up for you, you know, we'll do this show. Obviously, we'll try to do one next week. But if we can't, then we'll do one after the mandatory minicamp, which I believe is the 11th and 12th of June, which is a Tuesday and a Wednesday. The Giants are here veterans-wise for that extra day. They usually have a 3-day minicamp. Those of you who have been loyal listeners or loyal followers and are really into the whole spring schedule, what they've done now, at least under Brian Daboll, is on that third day, they do kind of an organization event for the players and their families and people that work in the organization and their families. I believe last year was a carnival, and so they really only have 2 on-the-field days. This year for the Giants, normally our summer, our abbreviated summer from a reporter's perspective, would start soon after that. But now the following week, June 20th, we've talked about it briefly, but the Giants Legends Night at the theater at Madison Square Garden, they have taken their town hall idea that they've done that I know so many of you have enjoyed. I've had the opportunity to be there with my nephew several times. They have now turned that event into a 100-year celebration for the Giants at the theater in Madison Square Garden. They've sold tickets. All of the proceeds from the tickets will go to the Giants Foundation, and it's going to be some event. They've promised roughly 20 former stars of this organization, plus members of the current team, the front office, I'm sure ownership, John Mara, will take the stage. So they've put a lot into it. It'll be a very interesting night for the Giants. That'll be June 20th. So even though the mini camp usually is the end of the off-season program, we still have another event to cover. And then for me, I will be at our North Jersey Sports Awards, which is always a great event. It's kind of morphed through the years in terms of being an Athlete of the Week dinner, and now it's the North Jersey Sports Awards. That's for high school athletes, the best of the best in North Jersey in our coverage area. I will be there because the special guest will be Tommy DeVito, and I will conduct a Q&A with Tommy on stage at the show. So looking forward to that. And that will kind of be my final event of the off season, and then hopefully take a little bit of a break, and we'll be back with my 100 players, top 100 players in Giants history that I will bring back. I did it, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago. We will bring that back. There will be changes, and that'll launch probably beginning of August, first week going into the second week of training camp, but we don't have a day yet. Then you're talking training camp. And before we get into what I've seen and observations at OTAs and the hot topics that I've promised, the Giants will have joint practices here in New Jersey leading into their preseason opener against the Detroit Lions. It's basically a return the favor. Last year, the Giants were in Detroit. This year, the Lions will come here. The Giants, since I've been on the beat, for more than a decade, the Giants have only had one joint practice here with another team that they've hosted, and that was the Jets in Brian Dable's first year. So this is a big step forward for the Giants to host 2 joint practices with the Lions going into their preseason game with Detroit at MetLife Stadium. That will be, I believe, it's the second week of August. We don't have the exact date for the game, but I would imagine it'll be a Wednesday and a Thursday of that week, with the game being on Saturday. If the game is on Friday, then the practices with the Lions will be on Tuesday and Wednesday of that week. Usually the team has the off day before the preseason game. And then the Giants will make the trip down to Florham Park and have a one-day joint practice with the Jets prior to their preseason finale with Gang Green at MetLife Stadium, the game formerly known as the Snoopy Bowl. And it'll be interesting to see that team after the Jets and the Giants took a break last year because they were playing in the regular season. So in between those 2 games in the preseason, the Giants travel to Houston to see the Texans. It'll be interesting to see if CJ Stroud or any of the new Texans that everyone's all hyped up about after last year's breakthrough will be on the field in the game. But there will be no joint practices between the Giants and the Texans, which follows the Giants' schedule from last summer when they did joint practices with the Lions. Then they took a break in between, and then they had the finale with the Jets, but they didn't do a joint practice last summer with the Jets. All right, so let's go into observations from OTAs and hot topics in terms of where we're at. I think the biggest question right now, and it's kind of become a foregone conclusion, at least it is in my eyes, and I think we're going to get a resolution between now and the the veteran mini camp, which is mandatory on June 11th and 12th, and that is the status of Darren Waller. Now, I know Darren Waller made some headlines yesterday, posting his video of his new single on YouTube, and with not so thinly veiled references to his reported divorce with Kelsey Plum. And, I think there are 2 separate things. I don't want to dive into Darren Waller and start playing the games where I'm going to tell you what he's thinking and what analyzing his video. If you have interest in listening to his music, and look, I get it. There are some people who believe that athletes should not veer into other hobbies. We've had that conversation before. But make no mistake, there are guys in this locker room who enjoy music and see themselves as, hey, I can do that. Hey, I want to do that. And they want to dabble in music. Now, Darren obviously has the personal connection. You know, his grandfather was a jazz musician, and, you know, he has that love of music. When Darren joined us a year ago on All In, and we did that from the patio at the Giants facility, you know, he talked about his love of music and how he spent time in the studio. So it gets to a point where, you know, guys have to make choices and what they prioritize. So if you want to hear about, you know, speculation and see Darren Waller mocked for whatever video he put out regarding his divorce, and, you know, you want to start analyzing which actress he hired to play Kelsey Plum, or at least that's the presumption, but from everyone, you're not going to get that here. To me, it comes down to, I believe we haven't gotten, and I talked to Darren Waller the beginning of May when he did an event on mental health awareness, and he went and spoke to a group of people. I was able to talk to Darren on the phone. It was the second day of the draft. And, you know, he said flat out, like, he knew that he had to make football a priority. And if he could not make football a priority, that this was probably coming down the pike. You know, we can get into whether or not this was a smart decision by the Giants, making that trade for Darren Waller last year, giving up the third-round pick that they had from Kansas City in the Kadarius Toney trade. Did Waller work out? I mean, look, 52 catches, 552 yards, and a touchdown last year. He missed 5 games with the hamstring injury. That wasn't great, especially when they lost Waller in the midst of when things were really going poorly. I don't apologize for talking about how good Waller looked last summer. He looked like a difference maker. And I think ultimately when someone has an injury label, you start believing that it's not just a fluke. And it was disappointing. And I think Waller will tell you that he was disappointed with his first season with the Giants. But, you know, look, Darren Waller's been open about the personal issues that he's dealt with in the past. You know, people have asked me, you know, why are Joe Shane and Brian Dable putting up with this? You know, force Waller to make a decision. Look, the reality is they've already moved past this. This is a voluntary portion of the offseason. If Darren Waller were to show up at minicamp, they would see where he is physically and if he works into the lineup. They weren't counting on getting the cap relief if Darren Waller retires. Now, that being said, that is a big part of this. And I got my notes here. You know, if he retires after June 1st, which we're recording this on Friday, May 31st. So June 1st is on Saturday. The Giants would get $11.625 million in cap savings. If he retires before June 1st, they get essentially half of that, $6.707 million. So everyone wants to know why the Giants aren't pressuring Darren Waller. Well, first off, look around the league. Look at what people have talked about. The issues of mental health and mental health awareness for players. It's an important issue, and it's going to continue to become an important issue at the forefront of what people are talking about. If Darren Waller is as open as he is with his past history, and he's telling you that, you know, he's dealing with things, and you see that, you know, he's going through a divorce, and it was a year of unexpected change with the trade and coming back from the honeymoon, and all of a sudden they, you know, don't spend 4 months together. And, you know, we see on the surface, and I think the Giants are trying to do their best by Waller and by the team. You know, they drafted Theo Johnson in the 4th round. They went out and they signed tight ends, Chris Manhertz, stole from the Eagles. They still have Lawrence Cager here. Tyree Jackson came back. So, yeah, the tight end position looks a lot differently if Darren Waller is here. But I do believe that all involved are moving forward with the idea that Darren Waller will announce his retirement. When? I think you're going to start seeing things after June 1st, because I don't know if Waller retired prior to June 1st. I don't believe it's the same as a cut. So it's not like they could, when a player gets cut, you can actually defer the guaranteed money over 2 years. That's what the whole designated as post June 1st cut is. That allows you whatever cap hit that you are going to take, you can split it over the current year and the following year. So, for instance, if Darren Waller was owed $8 million, if they cut Darren Waller, he gets that $8 million. But if the Giants basically tag that as a post-June 1st cut, they get no cap relief before June 1st, but then that $8 million is split over 2 seasons. So it's 2024, you get a $4 million cap hit, and 2025, you get a $4 million cap hit. I don't believe retirement is the same thing. I think if Darren Waller were to retire on May 1st, the savings are what they are. It's $6.7 million. But if they hold off on his retirement until June 1st, which is Saturday, then the Giants would get $11.625 million in cap savings for this year. Now, you can roll the cap savings over, so all of a sudden that doesn't mean that the Giants get relief from Waller and they're going to start, Joe Shane's going to start sending out money for free agents that are still on the market. That's not going to happen. I don't believe it will, but it'll give them an opportunity to roll that cap money over till next year. So, for that $6 million difference in cap space, the Giants have waited. Waller hasn't been a distraction in the building. They've moved past it. They didn't say, you know what, we're not going to draft a tight end. We're going to wait on Darren. They drafted Theo Johnson. So Theo Johnson is here. Theo Johnson will have an impact if he gets up to speed early on, which just judging by seeing him in OTAs, I believe he will. And you have Daniel Bellinger here, who I didn't even mention before. So the Giants are okay at tight end, especially when you look at what they have in the wide receiver room. So I know everyone wants to talk about Darren Waller and the timeline. That's where we're at. So I believe by the next time we do a show, I think Darren Waller will have announced his retirement. And I do believe that it has been done with an understanding that we're going to give you space, you take your time, but once June 1st hits, that's really where we need to make a decision and see where you're at so we know what we have going forward. So I think that's kind of what you're going to see. And I think by the time mandatory minicamp comes, I think that's when you'll get a decision. Because, again, before then, the Giants are not going to put any pressure on Waller to be here. Yeah, I'm sure they want him to make a decision. I'm sure they don't want this hanging over the team or the organization or even having to answer questions about it, which they've deftly answered those questions. They've done a good job, in my opinion. Joe Shane, Brian Dable talking about that. But the reality is that until it's mandatory, which is June 11th, they couldn't put pressure on Waller to make a decision. And that's the reality of the situation. So that's where we're at. I don't believe Darren Waller will be a Giant this year. I believe he will retire, and we'll have to wait and see. But if as my grandmother would say, his music's not necessarily my cup of tea. So I don't, you want to go listen to his song. It's takes an acquired taste, I would say. And who am I to judge? I'm not putting out my single until July. So you can catch my single. It'll be coming out, probably around July 4th. We'll keep you posted. We'll let you know what's going on. So that was the Darren Waller thing. I felt like I needed to get through that. And so, hopefully it answered some questions for you, giving you an opinion as to where I'm at as far as the Waller thing goes. Tight end, I think you're going to see Daniel Bellinger. I think you'll see a lot of Theo Johnson. And I think between Jack Stoll and Chris Manhertz, I think one of those guys will be in the rotation. And then they'll just have to wait and see how it plays out with Lawrence Cager, Tyree Jackson, and then the other one between Stoll and Manhertz, who's healthy, who's not, and how they want to kind of put together their packages offensively from a tight end perspective. All right, so yesterday I posted on NorthJersey.com my 6 breakout candidates. So I wanted to just run through those really quick. Check that out on NorthJersey.com. And, the caveat I had was I wanted to stay a little bit under the radar. Didn't want to go obvious and tell you I think Kayvon Thibodeau will break out even more than he did last year now with Brian Burns in the fold. I didn't want to talk about, the obvious – guys that, I think he can break out, or I think he can break out. I wanted to make it just in terms of who you might not be thinking about that could ultimately have an impact. And when I listed the 6 guys, I definitely did so with the idea that, look, I understand that all 6 will likely not break out. If you think all 6 are going to break out, well, then all of a sudden that becomes a big change for the Giants. And Brandon Brown, assistant general manager, kind of noted that yesterday in his press conference, which was very impressive. If you haven't listened to Brandon, go watch the video that you've seen. I have some videos and I put them out on NorthJersey.com and on my Twitter/X account. So check out Brandon. He's always impressive when he talks to the media. And you can see why there are teams eyeing him to be their general manager in the not-so-distant future. Yes, because Brandon is a minority candidate, it would get the Giants a third-round compensatory pick in the draft if and when he is hired as a general manager by another team. But that's a story for another day. So my 6 breakout candidates. Number 1, Cordell Flott, corner. He's the leading candidate to be opposite Tay Banks. And people forget he came into the league at 20. I've talked to Cordell about that and how, the Giants viewed him as a developmental player, even though he was a third-round pick. He was a developmental player who was young, who was very thin, so rail thin, so really needed to get into a weight room at this level, understand what it means to compete at this level. He had some injuries his first 2 years, but I do think that when the Giants say they have confidence in Flott to take that spot, I do think they're telling the truth. Now, what would a breakout look like for Flott? Well, let's just say that Flott came out and had the kind of season this year that Tay Banks had as a rookie last year. I think the Giants would fall over themselves, really, really happy and pleased with how far Flott has come, given the opportunity. So that's what I'm envisioning. If Flott can take that job by being solid, by being willing to compete, yes, he's going to get beat. Yes, he's going to give up plays. But I think a mix of zone, off coverage, and man plays to Flott's strengths more than the press man coverage that Wink Martindale wanted from his corners here. And I think that's kind of where we're at. So number 1 would be Cordell Flott as my breakout candidate. Number 2, and this might surprise you because you're kind of looking at it going, well, didn't he kind of break out last year? And that's Wan'Dale Robinson. The more I watch Wan'Dale and the more I say, if he stays healthy, and yes, that's a big part of it, if Wan'Dale stays healthy, I think Wan'Dale can be a slot machine. I think Wan'Dale can really make a run at the kind of receptions that Odell Beckham Jr. and Saquon Barkley had both 91. That's the most catches for a receiver since I've been on the beat here with the Giants. And I think if things play themselves well, I think he fits in the Brian Daboll offense. I think on third down, especially as Malik Neighbors comes along early on, I think Wan'Dale is that guy. He's that safety valve. So I think Wan'Dale could certainly be a guy that we're looking at the end of this season saying, you know what, now we finally see why the Giants used a second-round pick on Wan'Dale out of Kentucky. The front office believes in him. I believe the coaching staff believes in him. And with the threats of Jalen Hyatt and then Malik Neighbors and then Darius Slayton, I do think Wan'Dale is in a position where, you can see Wan'Dale. I mean, I think an average season for Wan'Dale would be 5 catches, 50 yards every single week. That's the kind of player I think he can be with this offense. And then, maybe every other week or against the right matchup, he goes up to 6 or 7 catches a game and he breaks that 100 yards. But you're talking about, Steve Smith, Giant Steve Smith, not Steve Smith Sr., who we'll get to in a second, that kind of player in the offense. You remember, you go back to 2007 with the Giants and they had Plaxico Burress, you had Amani Toomer, but Steve Smith's his presence inside really was that guy on third down. He was Eli Manning's safety valve. I think Wan'Dale Robinson could be similar to what Steve Smith did, and no one's come close to what Steve Smith was able to do. Again, the Steve Smith from USC, not Steve Smith Sr. from the Carolina Panthers. We'll get to that in a couple minutes. But I mentioned Wan'Dale as a breakout. I also think Jalen Hyatt could break out. We'll talk about Jalen in a couple minutes in reference to Steve Smith and his appearance at the Giants OTAs yesterday. Steve Smith Sr., the Panthers Steve Smith, not the Giants Steve Smith. All right, let's run through these breakouts. John Michael Schmitz, that's an obvious one going into his second year. He needs to be an anchor on this offensive line. He was banged up last year, shoulder injury, just never really found his footing. Not an easy position to suffer through growing pains, but he played 14 games. I think JMS could be a difference maker in this offensive line. That's why they drafted him. That's why they put him in there from day one last year. So I see JMS as a guy who we could be talking about, taking that leap forward and being what the Giants need at center. Devin Singletary, I know some of you will probably look at that and go, really, a breakout? I've heard this from many people. I've seen it written and talked about nationally, the idea of the Giants did nothing to replace Saquon Barkley. And from a popularity standpoint, from a fame standpoint, and from a talent, go crazy viral because of the skill set and the rare ability to hit a home run, that's Saquon. So I don't believe the Giants replaced that. But I think Singletary has kind of been overlooked. I think he's solid. I think in this offense, as Eric Gray and Tyrone Tracy kind of come along as dual threats, I think Singletary will be the guy they lean on. And I do think that Singletary, through the first month of the season, could really be a player that, you look at and you say, boy, I didn't expect him to have the stats that he has with the Giants, 12 carries, 70 yards, that kind of thing. So I look at Singletary as a guy who we may look at mid-season and say, we didn't expect this from Devin Singletary. Now, I think Eric Gray and Tyrone Tracy will be the two backs moving forward for this team. I think both of them have an opportunity to do things in the passing game, but we'll just see how they come along. There's unknowns for both of them at this point. The talent's there. I know a lot of people are down on Eric Gray because of how he performed on special teams last year as a returner. I just think you should try to take that out of your mind and put him as a player who could really, with more opportunities, make some plays that are good for this team. All right, two more. Dane Belton. It's self-explanatory. Whenever he's been on the field, it's obvious he makes plays. It'll be very interesting to see where he fits with Jason Pinnock, and then obviously second-round rookie Tyler Newman. I think Belton, I've been impressed in the two practices that we've gotten to see this spring. Belton is really one of those guys that he just looks like he belongs out there, and sometimes that's half the battle. I think ultimately Newman will be on the field. I think the Giants, they had a 6 DB package yesterday, and I think we could see something like that a lot with 3 safeties and 3 corners. I think Drew Phillips, the third-round rookie, would be on the field with Flott and Banks, and then I think Pinnock, Belton, and Newman could be on the field as well, and then you mix and match with what you have up front with Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau and Bobby Okereke, and then you can decide what else you want to do to fill out that 11th spot on defense. Which player is it? Another linebacker? More likely, is it a player up front? Do you bring in Azeez Ojulari and have 3 edge guys? Have one of the edge guys rush inside? Wait and see. So my last breakthrough candidate is someone that is really under the radar. And part of that is because he was injured all last year, spent time on the practice squad, is Ryder Anderson. He has gotten an opportunity over the first couple weeks of the spring program. He just looks right next to Dexter Lawrence in base settings. And I think the Giants obviously like him. They kept him last year when, after his triceps injury suffered in training camp, that they could have just moved on. Instead, they kept him here. I think Andre Patterson, defensive line coach, sees big things, not just for Ryder Anderson, but Jordan Riley, who's another breakout candidate. But I think Ryder has that length that the Giants don't really have on the interior. And I think they could put him as the 3 technique next to Dexter Lawrence, get one-on-ones, and just tell Ryder, just go forward. Just do your thing and get up into the backfield and disrupt things. Now, I think Jordan Riley could be that kind of player too, but just something about seeing Ryder and kind of reading the tea leaves that I do think that he can be a player on this defensive front that nobody's talking about. So those are my 6 breakout candidates. We'll check back later in the year, see where we're at, see if I hit on any of them. If I hit on all of them, then the Giants might have a much better season than what Vegas and the odds makers and sports books across the country and in New Jersey believe they will have, having them right around 6 wins this season. So let's move on to the next topic. I teased it a little bit. Steve Smith Sr. Why is Steve Smith Sr. a Panther and Raven at Giants practice for the second year in a row? Well, he goes back to his time in Carolina. Joe Shane was an entry-level scout in Carolina. So Shane and Steve Smith have a relationship. And Brian Dable loves connecting with players across the league, and he believes that former players can be big influences on young players. And Steve Smith Sr. was here last year doing kind of a media project, and the Giants liked what he brought to the table. And with the young receivers that they have, lo and behold, they asked Steve Smith if he'd like to come back and kind of be an ambassador / coaching intern / veteran presence, iconic person that could step into a room and dole out advice and players are going to listen. I think that's why he's here. I don't think there's a title. It's not going to be a full season thing. At least I don't expect that. but I do think that throughout the spring and maybe even in training camp, he'll come back for a couple practices to work with it. Now, watching early on, he spent some time talking to Wan'Dale Robinson, I could see, but most of the on-the-field stuff was with Jalen Hyatt and Malik Neighbors, and to be honest, most of it was with Jalen Hyatt. Malik Neighbors was there. You can see Steve Smith had his ear. Now, doing the research, if you've read my feature column on Malik Neighbors about those in his inner circle and what they predict for him and his journey to the Giants, that I talked about, and I included a quote from Steve Smith Sr. that really praised Malik Neighbors. And he said, Steve Smith said, watching Neighbors run routes is like watching Picasso paint. So there was a lot to like about Malik Neighbors from Steve Smith's perspective. So while he'll be here and he'll lend a hand to Neighbors, so to speak, to me, based on what I watched in practice for almost 2 hours on Thursday, he's here for Jalen Hyatt. Now, Jalen Hyatt told me at the end of last season, his rookie season, that Brian Dable was trying to get him together with Stephon Diggs. I haven't had a chance to talk to Jalen, so I don't know if that officially happened. But Dable wants to facilitate those relationships. He sees things in players and then wants to hook them up with somebody that from his past that he can get them to help. Now, with Steve Smith, he was critical of Jalen Hyatt when Hyatt was coming out of Tennessee and talked about his lack of experience against press man coverage. And Steve Smith believes that that's a huge key to having young receivers come into the league, is that if you don't know how to deal with press man coverage, you are going to struggle. You need to get physical. So all the speed in the world doesn't necessarily translate if you can't get off the line of scrimmage. That's what Hyatt and Steve Smith worked on yesterday. They worked on a lot of releases at the line of scrimmage. You can see Steve Smith going through the progressions of working his feet and working his arms. Smith has said in the past, it's a fist fight in the phone booth. Like, he wants to be physical at the line of scrimmage, and he believes that you cannot be successful as a receiver in this league if you're not physical at the line of scrimmage. So that's where a lot of the Hyatt Smith tutelage comes. And just watching them, I put up some videos. You guys can enjoy those. It's not great videos because we're from a distance, but hopefully you can enjoy that. And like I said, Hyatt and Neighbors, I would not put them in the same box. I think Neighbors being the 6th overall pick, he's coming here at a different level. I mean, the Giants still believe that Jalen Hyatt has a lot of room to grow and mature and develop as a player. That's where a lot of the coaching comes in, the tips. And Hyatt, when I've spoken to him, has always seemed to be open to be able to do that. So that'll be interesting to see how big of a leap Jalen Hyatt can take. So that's that topic. I'll probably have more on that down the road. Once we get the chance to talk to Hyatt again, in terms of what he may have seen and how he's worked on his game. Hard Knocks, I wanted to mention this, and that goes back to Brandon Brown yesterday. We know the Giants are doing Hard Knocks off-season. It's already done. They may get, some editing at this point, but for the most part, you're going to see a lot of off-the-field stuff from the perspective of the front office and Joe Shane. You'll see a lot of Brandon Brown. I'm sure you'll see the Giants contingent going to different pro days. You'll see how they handle free agency. Chris Rossetti, Tim McDonald. So Tim is the director of player personnel. Chris Rossetti is pro personnel. So you're going to kind of get a lot of different things as far as what the offseason was like. And why do I think the Giants are doing it? Well, I think it's pretty simple. I think John Mara believes he has a front office and a personnel department and a coaching staff that works well together and that they're on the right track. They were not putting Dave Gettleman and Joe Judge on Hard Knocks. It just was not going to happen because there was dysfunction there. And it came to a head in 2021, and we saw what happened with Gettleman retiring, and Joe Judge, losing his job because of how the season played out and what they needed to do as far as getting a new general manager in here with the right head coach. And they didn't want to short themselves on the search for a general manager. And that really played a big role in why Joe Judge was out after 2 seasons. But the Giants believe in their process. And I think they want people to see their process, fans, media, and they know that Joe Schoen and the people around him will gain them respect. At least that's what they're gambling on. That the process itself, listening to them. You just listened to Brandon Brown yesterday. He's a smart guy. He articulates his thoughts well. He articulates the process well. So does Joe Schoen. And I think they are going to push that the way they work together with the coaching staff. The Dennis Hickeys and, like I said, Tim McDonald's and Chris Rossetti's, guys who are not necessarily out in front of everything to the mainstream Giants fan will now be put under that microscope. And I think the Giants want that to happen because they don't want to be viewed as a clown show, which is what they've been called. And you know what? On the scoreboard, that's all that matters. You win and you're not a clown show, or you're winning in spite of being a clown show. You lose and nothing you do will get respect, even though you want to talk about how well you're prepared, how well you scout, how you work together. Nobody's going to want to hear that. So I think the desire to do the offseason comes from wanting to show people it's almost like a, hey, we are not the clown show behind the scenes that you say we are. And, ultimately it doesn't matter. Well, for most people, it's going to be what's your final record. That's it. The old Parcells line. Everyone uses it. You are what your record says you are. And that's what the Giants will have to deal with. But I do think that that's the motivation for Hard Knocks. And you're not going to see what you see from a traditional Hard Knocks. So some people might not like it. If you're a fan who wants to hear about the players, you might not get a lot of, interviews with Dexter Lawrence or Brian Burns. Now, the Brian Burns trade may be a big part of this, but I don't expect an entire episode, following Brian Burns and him finding out he was getting traded and that kind of thing. You could. That would be cool. But I don't know if you're going to get that. I don't know if you're going to get a lot on Saquon Barkley and Xavier McKinney and their decisions to leave via free agency, the Giants' decisions to let Saquon go and get an offer and not give him an offer and this time around, and what happened with Xavier. Maybe you'll get that, but I don't get that sense that that's what they're going to focus on. I think they're going to focus on the process. I think they're going to focus on what they can do to kind of change the perception of what the Giants are behind the scenes. Because if you convince people that you're doing it the right way, then the next step is putting it on the field and making sure that things turn around. If you can't convince people that you got everything going the right way, then people are just going to wait until you win. And if you don't win, then perceptions will never change. All right, so we hit on a bunch of different stuff. I don't want to get into depth chart. I think we can do that later on this spring after the mini camps, kind of reset the table. We've gone for about 45 minutes now, so hopefully I didn't lose you guys. Hopefully people are still watching and listening. I think we hit on everything we could. We had the breakout candidates, talked about the Waller situation, Hyatt Neighbors with Steve Smith, talked about Hard Knocks. We had the assistant coaches. I'll give you, that's how we'll end today. I'll give you a couple quick hits. I made all my notes before the show. we had the offensive coaches yesterday, and I spent a lot of my time with Carmen Brasillo. Obviously, the impact he has with the offensive line will go a long way in terms of whether this team turns a corner. A couple things he said, name drop Dante Scarnecchia. He said, you'd be a fool not to listen to the wisdom of, in my words, the godfather of offensive line coaching. I mean, that's Scarnecchia. You still have to do the job as far as Brasillo goes. Asked about Evan Neal and to an extent JMS. Brasillo, who spent time at Youngstown State, brought up Jim Tressel, former Ohio State coach. He said the piece of wisdom he got from Tressel was don't judge a player when he's young and don't judge a player when he's injured. And that applies to Evan Neal. Now, I know most of you have already bailed on the idea that Evan Neal might turn it around. The Giants haven't bailed on him yet. Will they? Well, I can't put a timeline on that, but I don't believe that they will allow Evan Neal to sabotage a season that they desperately need to be competitive this year. And we'll just have to wait and see. So you see how that goes. I asked Brasillo what he wants in his offensive line. He said he wants to be tough. We have to be smart. He said if you work those two areas, then I think you'll have good results. And, that comes with talent, comes with development, but they want to be smart and tough. I guess dependable's gone out the window at this point from the mantra of Shane and Dable when they came in. You don't hear anybody say that much anymore. They talk about smart and tough. I know it kind of became a crutch in the media when they talk to people, smart, tough, dependable. So I don't think too much into that. I don't need to analyze it. I just think it's funny whenever that comes up. When someone says they're smart and tough, I almost want to say, and dependable. But, we're not hearing much about that recently. Another thing from Brasillo, continuity. He said, I don't fret this time of year. He said, I'm going to jumble the starting group. I know there's been a lot of attention in terms of John Runyon Jr. being at right guard. He's not at left guard, even though he told us in March when he signed that he preferred left guard. Look, he's split down the middle playing left guard and right guard. The Giants are going to do what they have to do for their best five. They want Jermaine Illuminor on the field. He's in their best five. They want to give Evan Neal an opportunity at right tackle, so they're going to put Illuminor on the field. Do you put Illuminor at right guard and then put Runyon at left guard? That still may happen, but right now Illuminor is at left guard, Runyon's at right guard. Runyon said he's comfortable at either, so when someone's going to start yelling and screaming and saying, well, that's not what Runyon said, I was on the Zoom call. I heard what Runyon said. I went back and checked the quote directly from Runyon. He said he probably preferred left guard, but he's comfortable at either. And that's where they're at right now. Let's see. Not necessarily a fan of rotation. I know that's a big thing with the Giants offensive line going back to Joe Judge. And then we saw some rotation last year a little bit. He said, because that plays with players' confidence. He said, you need to have good trust in the players you have to run a rotation. A lot of times that'll happen if a player's workload needs to be lightened a little bit, whether he's coming off from injury or is a younger player. He said, but for the most part, he would rather get his five guys and go through it. And doesn't want to hurt the confidence of players, which I thought was interesting. Mike Groh, wide receivers coach, Jersey, about Neighbors, said he has all the tools to win in all three facets. He said to win the short game, the intermediate game, and the long game, and that he's dynamic. He said the big thing when talking about Neighbors and Hyatt and even Wandell, the younger receivers, and I thought this was an interesting quote from Groh. He said, it's what to do, it's how we're doing it, and it's why we're doing it a certain way. And that's kind of the three foundational pieces, right? When you're coaching and when you're teaching younger players especially, you want to teach them what to do, how to do it, and you also want to give them the backstory as to why you're doing it a certain way. Because when you're a professional player, you've already gone through, 10 years of coaching, and, like Drew Lock said yesterday, he's already had, four different coaches, four different offenses, that kind of thing. You just want to know why, and you want to know how, and you want to know what you're going to get there. And I think that was interesting from Groh. I thought, sounds cliche, but I do think it matters. Said Hyatt, his growth has been tremendous. That was his word. He said he's stronger and still has the speed. The confidence is the result of demonstrated performance. So no matter how confident you are on practice field, once you get into games and you make plays, you're going to get more confident. And he said about Hyatt, he's not afraid to work. That's what I've seen too. Competition in the wide receiver room is high. These guys know that there's a lot of young players on this team. So if you're trying to break through, you have got to really stand out. One of those guys, Bryce Ford Wheaton, this time last year, we would look at him as a top 4 guy. Right now, he's just trying to make the team, coming off an ACL. Was impressive on Thursday. I liked some of the things I saw from Ford Wheaton. I think he's going to have more of a role on special teams. He's one of the sleepers, I would say, come training camp. He's going to be a big fan favorite. He's going to make some plays, and fans are going to start that groundswell of, we need Bryce Ford Wheaton on this team. That'll kind of call into the Miles Boykins and the Allen Robinsons, and where do they fit, and can a guy like Ford Wheaton steal a spot or earn a spot from them? So keep an eye on that as we go forward. And the last coach I'll leave you with was Tim Kelly, who is the tight ends coach, former offensive coordinator in this league from Tennessee. He talked about Theo Johnson and said, even the rookies acting like a pro. And they're very impressed with the way Theo Johnson has come here and kind of attacked this opportunity with no Darren Waller here, and what he's done. I mean, physically, Theo Johnson, he stands out. I put up the photo yesterday on my Twitter account, @Art_Stapleton. If you don't follow me now, what are you waiting for? If you can put up the occasional Rangers tweets. But he called him a big joker, which I thought was funny. But I put up the photo of Steve Smith Sr. and Theo Johnson. They were just standing next to each other in front of us where we were watching the team periods yesterday. And I just thought it was kind of funny. Like, here's someone in Steve Smith Sr. who I expect to eventually be in the Hall of Fame. And then you look at Theo Johnson, and he's just dwarfing Steve Smith Sr. Look, Steve Smith Sr. is not known for his size, but it just stood out to me. That's why I took the picture and put it up. All right. Last story comes from Tim Kelly. And I think we kind of forget that. And even I do, because I've been covering this team for a long time now. Sometimes you need to see it through the eyes of someone who's not been here, who has not looked at this franchise from the inside out as long as I have. And I do think that this was important. Tim Kelly was talking about, being with the Giants now and why come here and what appealed to him. And, obviously there are connections from Tennessee that are here. It was an opportunity to come here. Ryan Cowden's in the front office with Joe Shane. He was in the front office in Tennessee. You've got Shane Bowen here. So there was that familiarity for Kelly. But he said, there's just still something about the New York Giants of coming into this franchise. And he said he was here the other day with his family, and he has 2 young girls, his daughters. He said, and they walked through the lobby of the Giants building. And it's nothing fancy per se, and I've walked through it thousands of times at this point since I first covered the Giants back in 2009 and took over the beat full time, with our guys at the time in 2011 in the run to the Super Bowl. And, he said, you look and you see the 4 trophies, and there they are. the 4 Lombardi trophies that the Giants have won, 8 championships, but 4 Lombardis. And he said, you just kind of look at them and you go, oh, that's what they look like in person. That was his quote. That's what they look like in person. And I think we kind of forget that sometimes. When the Giants talk about their history, people notice. Yeah, it doesn't make up for 4-13. It doesn't make up for failed coaches and failed general managers and the losing. Nobody says it does. But it's the 100th season of your franchise, the one that all of you listening root for. You love this team. You spend your money, you give up your tears and your emotions for following the New York Giants. Now here's your tight ends coach who's coming to work and talked about how his daughters looked and saw the Vince Lombardi trophies. They didn't have one in Tennessee. They didn't have a trophy in Tennessee. So they didn't have them on display. Now, granted, you can go elsewhere and you can see Vince Lombardi trophies. I've seen it many times. I just walk past it now and I just shrug, say, okay. But this is why they have them in the lobby. They don't go on tour, but if you walk into the building, you see the standard. And yes, they are now 12 years removed from that standard. And this current regime is charged with getting back to what the previous 4 regimes have failed to do. But I do think it's interesting. You want to know why people keep talking about the Giants' history? Because it's not a history that you should run from. It's not a medium Pepsi. It's not the embarrassment of players not showing up after the bye week for Ben McAdoo and Pat Shurmur only being here for 2 years and Dave Gettleman's mess and the things that he would say in the media that everyone would mock and Joe Judge's victory formation and a loss in the goal line and all the things that you claim to be embarrassed about, the young fan claims to be embarrassed about. There is still a history here that you can be proud of, and they want to get back to that. Will they get back to it this year? I'm not sure, but I certainly know that sometimes it helps to take a step back and appreciate where they're coming from and what they're trying to accomplish. So I heard that story yesterday, thought it was interesting, wanted to bring it to the table. Appreciate you being all in, as always. And we'll be back at some point next week. Thanks to Paul Wood, again, for producing this fine show, for everything that's up on YouTube and our old school audio platforms now. Appreciate you being all in. We're all in, too. We'll catch you next week for another edition, and we'll keep you getting closer. Season's coming. Where's this offseason going? Need to take a little bit of vacation. All right. Appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed the show today. Hope we hit on enough topics. Thanks for sticking around, and we'll be all in next week.